together. So research basically tries to study the distribution and determinants of disease frequency in human population. Most of the research, the purpose of doing research is to study the distribution, how the disease is distributed, and what determines the disease frequency in humans. So mark these two words, distribution and determinants. So you can have research questions and you can have research which is basically focused on studying the distribution of disease. And for this you have research which is essentially descriptive. It tries to describe the disease, okay? And you study the distribution of disease, and from this you try to formulate some kind of hypothesis. I'll talk to you a little more about this in the subsequent slides. The next kind of research questions are analytic, where your research is focused on determinants of disease. What determines the occurrence of disease? Not only the distribution, but what determines the occurrence of disease and outcomes. And you try to test hypotheses. So instead of generating hypotheses, you're testing hypotheses. And these hypotheses which have been generated from descriptive studies are tested in analytic studies. So this is a higher level of research. And most of the time what we are studying is the exposure-disease relationship, whether a particular exposure is linked to a particular disease, or in what way and in what magnitude are they related. So let us see what are the designs which are available. If we think of descriptive studies, they can be done on populations. And population descriptive studies are known as correlational studies. And I'll just tell you a bit more about it in the subsequent slide. The second kind of descriptive studies are studies which are done on individuals, which means you are not talking of population, but individual patients. And here you have case report, case series, and cross-sectional studies or cross-sectional surveys. These are all examples of descriptive design strategies or descriptive studies. And they focus on describing the disease frequency, basically. Now, you have the other large group of studies, big group, which is the analytic studies. And in the analytic studies, you have studies which are observational. And here you have two kinds of observational studies, basically, case control studies and cohort studies. And the difference between the two is that in observational studies, the investigator does not introduce any intervention. Whatever is happening naturally, that is observed. That is why these are observational studies. And you have another large group of intervention studies where the investigator introduces an intervention in one group, and there is another group which is denied that intervention or does not have that intervention, which acts as a control. And randomized controlled trials are the major forms of intervention studies, which are in this group of studies. So let us see what are the advantages or disadvantages of doing a particular kind of study. Let's first talk about descriptive studies. Now, descriptive studies, like I said earlier, describe the characteristics of distribution of disease in relation to person, place, and time, which means essentially the study is describing who gets this disease, where or which geographical location he gets it, and what time of the year or what particular time in any kind of if there is some kind of a relationship with the weather or a season or whatever. So essentially, descriptive studies are describing distribution of disease in relation to person, place, and time. Now, among these correlation studies, which I said, correlational studies, which I said are done on populations, where data from entire populations is used to compare disease frequency between different groups of people, either during the same period, or it could be in the same population which is studied at different points in time. And I'll give you an examples of both of these kind of studies, both these situations. If you look at this particular figure, and you can see that there has an x-axis, a y-axis, and there are some dots which are plots. And if you look at this, you'll find that on the x-axis you have per capita daily consumption of red meat in grams. And on the y-axis, you have colon cancer incidence per lakh women. And the plots represent different countries. So essentially, this is a correlational study between the consumption of red meat and the occurrence of colon cancer in women. And you look at these, and if you look at this, you'll find that there is some kind of linear relationship between the consumption. As the consumption of red meat increases, the colon cancer incidence is also increasing, and you can see this linear relationship. So in New Zealand, which has the highest consumption, you have the highest incidence, and in Nigeria, which has the lowest consumption, you have the lowest colon cancer incidence. So this kind of correlational study is just one of the earliest kinds of studies which there is a tentative hypothesis that basically there may be some relationship. But remember, this study has been done in populations. It has not been done in individuals. Similarly, this is another kind of graph from another study where on the x-axis you have cigarettes per capita, cigarette smoke per capita. And you have on the y-axis you have coronary heart deaths, coronary heart disease deaths per 100,000 population. And this is both for the year 1960, and these are various states of the United States of America. And if you look at it, you can find that there is some kind of relationship between the number of cigarette smoke and the deaths which are occurring in this population. Again, these figures represent population data. They are not data of individual patients. Descriptive studies on individuals and not populations are case report, case series, and cross-sectional studies. And case reports, I think all of you know, these are detailed reports of the profile of a single patient. And sometimes they give a clue as to a possibility of a link being there. For example, the link between oral contraceptive use and pulmonary embolism was first reported as a case report, and later on, subsequently, it was proven in bigger trials. Similarly, case series is a description of the characteristics of number of patients with a given disease, and sometimes case series also give you a clue as to some disease or a disease entity or a link. For example, the occurrence of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia in homosexual men was the earliest kind of clue for the AIDS, which was subsequently realized to be due to the virus. So, but this was one of the first descriptions of disease which came through a case series. Then cross-sectional studies, a cross-sectional survey. Now, this is a kind of descriptive study, and this is very frequently done. I think when you do your research here as part of your thesis or dissertations, do cross-sectional studies where the status of an individual with respect to exposure and disease is ascertained at one point of time. And this snapshot of health experience of a group of people is presented as a cross-sectional study. And you will see a lot of cross-sectional studies and surveys which describe this health experience of a particular group of people. And the problem with cross-sectional studies is that it is very difficult at times to know the temporal relationship between an exposure and disease. You do not know whether a particular exposure is causing disease, because both are being taken at the same time does not mean, are existing at the same point of time does not mean that there is some kind of temporal relationship to them. Because ideally the exposure has to precede the disease, and you do not know whether that is happening or not. And because both exposure and disease status can change. You know, someone may have a particular kind of, he may be doing a particular thing at a given point of time, a high risk thing, and then he may just stop doing it. So it depends on, the exposure is not a constant. And the disease also depends on the fact whether what is the average time the disease lasts. Suppose the disease just, you know, resolves, or the patient dies or something, you know, the duration of the disease is very short, or the duration of the disease is very long. So depending on what is actually how long a disease remains in a particular group of people, that determines whether it will be captured in a snapshot of the health experience of that population at a particular time. So there are some issues which create inferior quality evidence in cross-sectional surveys, but these are good studies to generate hypotheses. You cannot prove hypothesis again, because it's very difficult to say for sure whether to test a hypothesis, for example, whether you can do some kind of statistical test of significance. There are some factors which remain unaltered over time, some exposures, and you can have some kind of valid statistical association for those. For example, sex of a person, blood group of a person, race, if these are the kind of exposures you are looking at. But majority of exposures keep on changing over time, and therefore cross-sectional studies may not capture the complete picture. So from now we go on to the cohort studies, which are studies which is a kind of analytic observational study. And what do we do in cohort studies? A group of individuals is classified on the basis of presence or absence of a particular exposure. It is presumed, and it is, you make sure that when you start the cohort study, none of the people whom you are doing the study in has the disease. The outcome is not occurred yet. You start off with a group of people. One group has exposure, another group is unexposed. You follow them over a period of time and assess for the occurrence of a particular outcome. So these are cohort studies, and they are known as cohort studies because there are two cohorts. One is the exposed cohort, the other is the unexposed cohort, and you see what is the difference in the outcomes between the two, and that gives you a link between exposure and a particular outcome. And cohort studies can be prospective. If the outcome is still to occur, it can be retrospective. If the outcome has already occurred, but you start your study on the classification is on the basis of the groups are divided on the basis of exposure, but the outcome has occurred in the past, and you actually dig it out from your records. You actually, it is based on the study of your own records or databases to do this retrospective cohort studies. And ambidirectional studies are where there is both a prospective as well as a retrospective component in the cohort study. So what are the advantages of cohort studies? There are certain advantages and strengths, and obviously there are certain disadvantages. The advantage of a cohort study is that this is optimal for rare exposures, which means that if there is a rare exposure, you can gather a group of people, a cohort which has that rare exposure, and then another group which obviously does not have that exposure, and you can follow them for a period of time. So you start off with that with that group of people who have that rare exposure. And therefore, you will have sufficient numbers. So it is optimal for rare exposures so that you can get all these patients together in a cohort. And you can study the multiple effects of a single exposure. So if there is one exposure, you can find out several outcomes for that particular exposure. For example, if you want to see the effect of oral contraceptive on cardiac disease, as well as coagulation status, as well as you want to study outcome in the development of cancer, a lot of things can be studied. From exposure is one, but several outcomes can be studied. The temporal sequence between exposure and disease is clear. Selection bias is minimal. And you can find out the incidence rates of outcome of exposed, and between the ratio between outcome in exposed and non-exposed will give you the incidence rates directly. The disadvantage or the limitations of cohort study is that they are very expensive and time consuming. It is inefficient for rare diseases. For example, whichever disease you're trying to find, if it does not occur so commonly, so you will be watching a lot of people for a very long period of time without sufficient outcomes occurring. So unless the outcome is common in the exposed, that is the attributable rate is high, this study will not be so good. If you are going to do a retrospective cohort study, it requires availability of adequate records. And one of the major problems in cohort studies, especially the prospective cohort studies, is that loss to follow-up is a major threat to validity. If you're going to observe a group of people for several years to see for outcomes occurring, quite a number of people may just move out and you may be unable to trace them, as you do not really know whether a particular outcome has occurred or not. So these are the major issues. So remember, cohort studies are optimal for rare exposures. And the other thing is that you can actually find out the multiple effects of a single exposure. So these are the two important strengths of cohort studies. Case control studies. Now, this is another very important group of studies which are observational analytic kinds. And here what is done is that the subjects are classified on the basis of presence or absence of diseases. If disease is present, they are cases, and they don't have disease, that particular disease, they are controls. Now remember, this is how case control study differs from a cohort study. In a cohort study, your patients are classified, or your subjects are classified on the basis of exposed or non-exposed. In case control study, subjects are classified on the basis of cases, whether they have disease or an outcome, or they do not have disease, or controls. So the way the patients the groups are chosen is different in a cohort study from that in a case control study. So here you start off with cases and controls, and it can be done in situations where it can be retrospective, which means you actually all the cases which had to occur have already occurred and you are just doing study in those people. Or it can be prospective, that all new cases after the study has begun will be enrolled. And it can be done in prevalent cases, or it can be done in incident cases. Incident cases means new cases developing, and it is always preferred that it is done in incident cases. And in these two groups of patients, one who are cases, in these two groups of subjects, one which is a case, another which is a control, you find out the presence or absence of a particular exposure. And if you can, then you classify this like this in a 2x2 table. For example, a causal factor like smoking, present, yes, no. Disease like lung cancer, present, yes, no. So these are the cases, yes. These are the controls, no. And you find out whether they have smoking. yes or no in this group, yes or no in this group. And you calculate a odds ratio, which is calculated by AD divided by BC. So essentially you calculate the odds ratio. You don't calculate any kind of, directly you cannot calculate the incidence. The odds ratio we think will approximate the incidence. So what are the advantages of case control studies? It is valuable for rare conditions, and you can assess role of multiple risk factors. So that cohort studies are valuable for rare exposures, while case control studies are valuable for rare kind of diseases. Here you can assess the role of multiple risk factors, and there you can find out multiple outcomes in cohort studies. The advantage of case control study is that it is of short data duration. It can be, it's inexpensive. It has a smaller sample is needed, and it yields odds ratios which approximates the relative risk. The disadvantage is that it is limited to one outcome variable. So you can only choose a case and control. So you have only one kind of disease, which is outcome, which is being assessed. There's a major bias, potential for bias in selection of cases and control. Does not establish sequence of events. There's a potential bias in measuring exposure, and does not yield absolute risk estimates. So these are some of the disadvantages of case control studies. In the analytic studies, interventional studies or randomized control trials are a very important and strong levels of evidence. Is a very strong level of evidence is generated from randomized control trials, because they have a design which is very like an experiment. And these are studies which compare, obviously they're all prospective, which compare the effect and value of an intervention against a control in a human being. And as investigators, instead of being just observers, actually actively assign participants to a particular treatment or procedure, so that you allocate a particular intervention to a group of people. And this, how you do this allocation is done in a randomized manner. The purpose of why we do randomization is actually so that there is no confounding. That is the reason. One of the most important reasons for randomization is that you can avoid any kind of potential selection bias, that you give a particular treatment to a person of your own choice. Randomization makes sure that the investigator does not have any control in allocation, and it balances the known and unknown confounding factors when you do randomization in a sufficient number sample size, sufficient number of participants. You have various designs of randomized control trials: parallel, crossover, factorial. These are various designs. We're not going to talk about them, but these are some ways you can do it. But the major issues of randomized control trial relate to the ethics of doing a particular randomization, whether it is ethical to do randomization, whether you can actually deny a particular treatment to a particular group of people. So if you think, is it all right to do a randomization? Now, several times ethical issues are so important that despite the fact that you would like to do a randomized control trial, you cannot do it because ethically it may not be correct to introduce an intervention and deny, or to deny another group a particular intervention. And obviously this particular randomized trial can only be done when you do not have good evidence about the particular benefit of an intervention. If that evidence is already available, then you cannot, ethically you cannot randomize people into because that will deny a particular group of people that particular benefit of, if it is a beneficial thing. And similarly, if it is a harmful thing, there's a potential harm again. How can you randomize people to something which is going to harm them? So these ethical issues are a major challenge, and unless you figure them out, it's not wise to go ahead. The other thing is feasibility. How feasible it is to do it, given the constraints of the number of patients, the kind of patients you'll accrue, the kind of patients you want to do this particular trial on, and the feasibility is more a question of practicality, whether it's practical to do it. You would like to do it, but you may not have the sufficient number of people or logistics to be able to do it. And the third thing is the cost. All randomized controlled trials, most of them, at least the ones which involve major interventions and long follow-ups, are very expensive. So unless these three major issues are figured out, it is not a good idea to go ahead and do a randomized controlled trials. Several times when I sit in the ethics committee or I am part of some research committees also, I find people taking randomized controlled trials very lightly. They make a choice that we'll do a randomized controlled trial. So it is very, very important that you think very carefully about all the issues which are involved in randomized controlled trial before you start doing it. And choosing a randomized controlled trial means that you know the answers to all these questions which relate to ethics, feasibility, and cost. Now, before I tell this, we'll go to the last slide. Let me say that for doing a randomized controlled trial, there are certain guidelines which are known as the CONSORT guidelines. The CONSORT guidelines are is a short form or acronym for consolidated report guidelines for reporting of trials. So these are available, and if you just search for CONSORT, you will get this particular kind of guideline, which is a guideline which actually tells you how to design a randomized trial. So these are the consolidated standards of reporting clinical trials. And these consolidated standards actually describe in great detail, the CONSORT guidelines describes in great detail how you should plan a randomized trial and what should be, how you should write the protocol for it also, and how you should finally report it. And I would recommend that if you have any kind of wish of doing a randomized trial, after thinking of those three other things which I said, you must at least read these particular articles before you do any kind of randomized trial or you submit a proposal. Now, when you choose a particular, the thing is, how do you choose a study design finally? I mean, we have all these kinds of studies available from, you know, the descriptive kind, the analytic kind, and all those, whatever we have just talked about. Then how do you choose a particular study design? So what is best suited for a particular investigation at a given time depends on the particular features of exposure and disease, which means I talked to you, how frequent is this exposure? How common is the disease? And that depends whether you should do a cohort study or you can do a case control study. The logistic considerations of time and resources, which means how much time you have, how much money you have. If you are going to do a study, if you have only 6 months or 1 year to do a particular study, like you were doing some kind of project for your thesis, and you plan a study of 5 years, obviously you'll not be able to do it. So your consideration of time and the resources, what is the money, manpower, and other resources which are required for doing this particular study? This has all to be thought about. I mean, because it's one thing to plan a study, it's also important to know whether you'll be able to do it. And then, most important, and this has more to do also with your research question, where are the gaps in knowledge? Now, several times we do studies about things which we already know. Now, that doesn't really add to anything in the literature. If you're going to make an effort or doing a particular research, that must answer in at least a small base, some kind of aspect of a disease or management or whatever you're trying to do as an intervention, some kind of small gap in knowledge which that particular study will fill up. And that gap in knowledge must be identified. And how do you identify whether there's a gap in knowledge? By reading literature which exists. I find so many times that people do not read the literature of what is existing knowledge and information and start doing a particular trial or a proposal is submitted without really seeing what is the best evidence available in literature already. And you cannot keep on repeating the same thing again and again, because even if you do it, you will not find people who want to read about it. You will not find people who want to, publishers would like to publish it, because there's no audience for it. Who wants to read the same thing over and over again if there's nothing, no novelty, nothing new in it, and it's not actually filling any gap in knowledge. The other thing is studies build up in scale. So you start of anything by something which is like a descriptive study. Even when you are doing any other kind of study also, first of all, there is a descriptive component of your analysis of your particular study. And then there is a part where, you try to connect between exposure and outcome in an analytic method. You try to find out what is the connection. So first of all, you generate a hypothesis and then you test a hypothesis. Generation of hypothesis is done by descriptive studies, and testing of hypothesis, like I said, is done by analytic studies. And analytic studies are stronger, but then they build up upon earlier studies which are already existing in literature. So let me summarize this whole lecture by saying that it is very important to have the right research question. And then you must think of what will be the best way to answer that research question based on what are the studies which have already been done, what is your time available and resource available for you to do that study, and what are the particular features of exposure and disease. It requires great thought, it requires effort, but I think you have everything here in this university to help you with that. And so I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. And I have with me my colleague, Dr. Shivarajan, who is assistant professor in my department. He will explain some of the things which I said to you slightly in a better way with a few examples. And I think, how much time do we have? Okay, so we have, this is 10 minutes past 3. So he'll make a 10-minute kind of a presentation just to illustrate with some examples of the kind of studies we have talked about. And following this, then you are free to ask me questions. Thank you very much. Shivarajan.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. We should thank Professor Chaturvedi for a wonderful lecture. And before Dr. Shivarajan's lecture, I would like to tell you all that there is a link where we have to fill the assessment and feedback form. So after completion of the lecture, you ask the questions and also fill the form within 1 hour. We have shared the link for that. Dr. Shivarajan, please.
Yes, good afternoon everyone. So as sir has explained beautifully the basis of the study design and in a very, very simple manner so that you can understand the things, I will just elaborate these things with just 2 or 3 examples. So here's the first example of the cohort study. you know, the cohort study, as sir explained, it's generally done in the prospective way. So there is a very famous study. This is the very famous example of the very first cohort study done in the United States. And you know, this example started after the death of the famous president in 1950s. So the United States president died of a heart disease. So after that, they thought, what are the risk factors for the heart disease? Let's study this thing. And to identify the risk factors for the cardiovascular disease, they set up this study in the Framingham city in the United States in 1948. So what they have done, they took around 5,000 people in that, 5,000 healthy people aged between 30 to 60 in that Framingham city, starting in 1948. And they followed up them prospectively for the next 20 years. And what they have done, they asked their history, their examination and lab test every 2 years. Every 2 years, they used to call them and they asked these things from them. And their outcome point was whether they develop cardiovascular diseases or how many of them develop cardiovascular diseases. So just see, the sample here were the healthy individuals, and prospectively they were assessed, and the outcome assessed was cardiovascular disease. At the starting of the study, everyone, there was no evidence of disease in them, so they were healthy people. And over the after 20 years, they published this their finding, and they said, okay, the smoking, cholesterol or blood pressure, they increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, and the physical activity or high density lipoprotein, they decreases the cardiovascular disease. So these things we know now, but this is the way this study answered this question. Another thing, the same question has been answered by in a case control way by another famous study, Inter-Heart study, which was done in 2000. So the researchers did this study in middle income countries, and then they said, okay, we know some factors which causes cardiovascular disease, but they set up another objective to whether it holds true in these countries or not. And they said, okay, we can't do this study in a prospective manner in a 20 years or 30 years time. Let's do in a shorter way. So how they did it, they chose this case control design, and the objective was the same, to determine the association between risk factors and the myocardial infarction. And just note that the outcome here was just one, the myocardial infarction. And how did they started the study? They choose the cases with a known diagnosed myocardial infarction cases, and controls were people those who didn't have any disease at that time, from the hospital or from the community. And they assessed 9 factors in both of these cases and controls. The studies, they objectively said in the protocol that we will study only these 9 factors: the smoking, alcohol use, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, exercise, diet, stress, lipid profile. And again, in this way, their finding was that few of them, like smoking, hypertension, these things causes increase the risk of myocardial infarction, and the exercise, food use, they protect against the myocardial infarction. So, and they did this, they finished this study within the 3 years. So they went retrospectively, they went from cases and controls to their risk factors, asked the risk factor by the history, by their medical records, and they finished this study in the 3 years. Another way, another method today we studied was the cross-sectional study. So cross-sectional study, as sir said, the both exposure and the outcomes, they are assessed at the same point of time. Patients are not followed. They are, both the things are assessed at the same point. So for example, a lot of people are joining us today. So let us ask a simple question. What is the prevalence of gastritis among coffee drinkers and non-coffee drinkers in this room who have joined us? So for example, I ask you a question related to this question. Do you drink coffee? So some of you may say yes, some of you may say no. and then I ask you, do you experience any upper abdominal pain suggestive of gastritis? So some of you will say, okay, yes, I experience, and some will say no. And what do we get from this? So coffee drinkers, let's say out of 100 people, 60 say yes, I drink coffee, we drink coffee, and out of 60, 40 says yes, I have gastritis, I have upper abdominal pain. So what we get the prevalence of gastritis. So what we get here is the prevalence of gastritis among the coffee drinkers. So 40 say yes, we had gastritis among the 60 coffee drinkers. So we get 40 over 60. And there were 40 non-drinkers, and out of those 40, 10 says yes, we experienced gastritis today. And so the prevalence is 10 out of 40. But what is the problem of this thing? We cannot say the gastritis, because of gastritis, some of them stopped drinking coffee, or because of coffee they had gastritis. So as I said, there is no temporal relationship. You cannot tell which causes what. You cannot test a hypothesis. You can just generate something. You can just generate, okay, there may be coffee may lead to gastritis, but just a hypothesis generating. You cannot test something. It is just one way. And today I ask coffee drinker 60. Suppose after 1 week I ask again the same question among these 100 participants. So this coffee drinker may be reduced to 30. So again the prevalence changes. So it depends upon time. It depends upon the cases which you are talking about. It depends upon the relationship. So, and this is the last example I want to share with you. It's an example of randomized control trial. So as I said, there are randomized control trials are not easy to do. There are a lot of ethical issues, a lot of other issues related to it. But I would say, when do you think that, okay, a study I am reading is a randomized or not? It's a trial or not? Or should I do a randomized trial or not? There are very, very few basic things, The first thing, as I said, the investigator introduces the intervention. It is the only study where the investigator introduces the intervention. In other studies, either it is happening by its own, but here is an investigator who is active, who is introducing the intervention in one group or not in another group. The second point is the randomization, and the randomization point. And third thing, the randomized trial is not something which you just gets a dream in the night and you just start doing randomized next day. Suppose I do some operation in one way, and I think I should do a randomized next day. Okay, I should do a randomized trial. No, it doesn't work that way. There must be some data supporting the thing which you want to study. So there must be a level of evidence we should generate from the descriptive study. So for example, this is a very famous trial published in just last year. So it's a lymphadenectomy trial in ovarian neoplasm, very famous LION trial. So the background was, the researchers said, okay, we have retrospective data from the study which says if we remove lymph nodes in ovarian cancer patients, it improves survival. So they started this trial. They said, okay, let's test this retrospective data in a randomized fashion to get a high level of evidence whether it is true or not, whether this thing actually improves lymph node dissection, improves the survival or not. So the objective was to determine if lymph node dissection improves survival or not. So what was the patient population? Patient population was advanced ovarian cancer, and the outcome assessed was overall survival. Patients were enrolled for 3 years, from 2009 to 2012, and after that for next 6 years, from 12 to 2018, they were followed up to see what are the outcomes, whether they alive or they are not alive. And this is the design. So on the left side, you can see the patient population were advanced stage ovarian cancer with no enlarged node at presentation. So these patients were randomized into two groups. One group was received no lymph node dissection. In another group, they did the lymph node dissection, and they followed up them for 6 years, and to see how many patients are alive in first group and how many patients are alive in the second group. And what was the finding? Just see, the objective was the overall survival. And after 6 years, they saw, okay, around 65%, 65 months is the survival group, is the survival in the lymph node dissected group. And patient where no lymph node dissection group, they survived for a median time of around 69 months. And this 65 versus 69 was not significant. See, the p-value is 0.65 and confidence interval was crossing 1. So what they conclude? They conclude that there is no benefit of doing lymph node dissection in these patients who has normal lymph node. So this study generated the high level of evidence, which retrospectively data said, okay, there is a benefit, but the actual result was there was no benefit. So these are just a few examples just to stimulate you, and we hope you have understood the research design better today, and we are happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
How do we get the screen back? Screen on कर दीजिए इसका.
Screen on. ना बोलेंगे तो इको ही होगा.
Yes. So, if there are any questions, I can take it and I can answer as many as I can. So, if anyone would like to ask any questions relating to what we both of us talked about, I have given you some very basic things to understand, and I think the classification of research design is this classification is very important. I think this is one of the most simple ways to classify research designs. And I think if you reflect on what I have told you or talked to you about, you will get many answers to your own queries regarding what kind of research you should pursue for a particular research question. And if any one of you ready with a question, we can answer that, or you can at some point of time ask me personally. That would be most welcome. All right, I think
there is no question.
I don't see any questions. So basically, I think they can answer the.
Sir,
Yeah,
I have one question.
Yeah. Who's this?
Sir, while we do our thesis, can we do retrospective study for that?
Sorry, can you just repeat your question? I didn't hear it. Right.
For our thesis, can we do retrospective analysis?
For what?
For our thesis, can we do retrospective analysis?
For your thesis. For your thesis.
Yes, sir.
Oh, of course you can do it. You can. You see, any kind of research is permitted as part of your thesis, provided your research guide approves it. So essentially, there is nothing which says that you can't do retrospective studies. A lot of retrospective studies, in fact, are done, and it's a good way, because if you have good quality records available, the best way for you to do a particular study is to actually search your own records. And
Yes, sir.
that is one of the reasons why we always insist that good record keeping not only serves the present, but also the future group of residents and people who are going to join your department, because you have data which can be mined to bring out a lot of interesting hypotheses, which can also be subsequently tested. Sure, you can do it. You can do it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, one more question. The thesis which we do, is it a phase 1 trial or a phase 2 trial? And observational study, descriptive study?
So
What kind of
here
study it
we,
is?
you can classify studies also as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but that is actually meant more for drug studies, There's that particular classification, which means what is the phase of drug development a particular kind of drug is being put into. So, for example, you have a phase 1 drug trial, you have a phase 2 drug trial, and phase 3 drug trial is a clinical trial where you actually have two arms. This is something like an intervention trial, like a randomized control trial. That is the phase 3 trial. Phase 1 trial and phase 2 are earlier trials. Phase 1 is when you just find out what maximal permitted dose and toxicity of a drug. And actually, most of the time, you're just seeing it in a number of situations, not for a particular specific disease. And in phase 2, there is usually single arm studies where you use try to find the effect of a drug in one arm of particular disease, one specific disease. Okay? So
Yes,
that's
sir.
way of classifying usually drug trials. But here, the classification is for another larger kind of the classification I'm describing is more appropriate for this particular
Okay. Thank
all
you,
the
sir.
studies, all the studies.
Sir, I just want to ask one question. Sir, if it is not, it may be not related to thesis. Sir, actually, sir, these days we are doing, sir, these web-based questionnaire studies. Sir, how good or how authentic it is to conduct these type of studies?
What based?
Sir,
Questionnaire
web-based,
based.
Google online. Sir, these
Okay. So the
virtual
see,
online questionnaire based.
all kind of surveys are like cross-sectional studies. Okay. So
Yes,
basically, you are trying to find out the characteristics of a particular group of people, right?
yes, sir.
So I mean, any scientific activity is a kind of research, provided it is designed in a particular way to answer a question. So if you can do a survey just for the heck of it, or you can do it as a scientific study, okay? The science
Yes,
of it comes when you actually write the proposal of what do you intend to find, what is the research question, what is the question which my research is going to answer. Okay, so
yes, sir.
your design actually can be a cross-sectional design, but the proposal encapsulates what do you want to find out and whether you can really find an answer to what you want to find out from this particular design and the way you're conducting a trial. Okay, so
Okay, sir, can we make it as a basis like a for pilot study for conducting other study further?
yes,
Or can it for
everything, all studies are the basis for doing further studies. No study is the final study anyway, right? Till you reach a level where you have meta-analysis of multiple randomized control trials. So whatever information, even the small bits of information which you collect, add to the information, scientific knowledge, and lead on to other studies which can be better designed or are larger or which are more powerful to give an answer to a particular question. Okay? So you can do it.
thank you, sir.
While it can certainly be private.
Sir, would the
Yes.
video be available on any portal for those who haven't watched it? As the previous video was not available to us.
Previous what? Sorry? Yep. Your voice is yeah, so I couldn't get it.
Sir, would this video be available afterwards also? Like
Uh,
on any portal?
I'll have to find that out from Professor Shelley whether these videos or these lectures will be available on YouTube.
Today's video is there until that.
So we will let you know, and most probably if it is available, it will be available as a YouTube presentation, and I think you will be informed about it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Should we stop it? Or do you want to- तो अब
सर वो लिंक फॉर्म भरने के लिए जो बोल रहे हैं ना,
आप बोल दीजिए।
Thank you, everyone. There is a link in the chat box, which is to be filled by all of you. That is the feedback as well as post-assessment of this session, which was wonderfully explained by Professor Chaturvedi and Dr. Shivarajan. Please fill the form. Those who will fill the form, they will definitely get a certificate also. And the link address will be closed by 4:30. Thank you. Thank you, sir. After, sir, please. After.